All right, welcome back, everyone. Season 3, Episode 8, Retirement Series Part 2, talking about the 4% rule today. And that is one of the most common retirement income strategies that is written about and that people think about using when it comes to their retirement. And it is based off of what we call a total returns approach. So thinking about that and just the analysis and foundation of where the 4% rule came from is important. And I have the white paper pulled up here on my screen and I can link that in the show notes. But basically, this rule, if you will, was devised by an advisor named Bill Bengen in the mid 90s. And basically, he looked at what he deemed safe withdrawal rates out of an investment portfolio. And just the Cliff Notes version of the white paper here, there's a couple quotes that I want to read. And then also I have some audio that is from Wade Pfau. And Wade is one of the, if not the most prestigious retirement income, I guess, researchers, if you will. And he takes a look at just all different types of retirement strategies, and he built out a specific retirement income questionnaire that's different from the standard risk tolerance questionnaires that a lot of investors do when they open investment accounts. This profile is basically a questionnaire revolving retirement income style rather than how to invest a portfolio. So it's really breakthrough research and how to stay strategy agnostic when it comes to retirement planning and really find a style that fits a specific investor. And I touched a little bit on this in part 1, but thinking about a safety first approach, which might use guaranteed income sources versus a total return approach, which is what we're going to talk about today with that 4% rule. So I'll play that audio here in a minute, but looking at Bill Bengen's white paper on the 4% rule, he says here, assuming a minimum retirement of 30 years of portfolio longevity, a first year, that's important, a first year withdrawal of 4%, followed by inflation-adjusted withdrawals in subsequent years, should be safe. So it's important to make the distinction here. The 4% rule is kind of morphed into just taking 4% out of your portfolio every single year. And that's not actually what the rule was intended as in Bengen's white paper. He really was saying 4% of the first year of whatever that balance is. And in his research, he talked about doing just January 1st. You just take out, 4% of that first year balance. And then in year 2, whatever that balance was, you adjust it for inflation. So as an example, and I'll post another PDF example of the differences here and what I'm explaining. But basically, in Bengen's research, if let's say you had a $1 million portfolio and in the first year, that 4% would be $40,000 that a retiree would take out of that portfolio. Well, let's say that the market grew 8%. So you take out 40,000 of your million, and now you have $960,000 left. Then the market grows at 8%. Let's just assume. So now that balance at the end of year 1 is $1,036,800. So now in year 2, let's say that inflation was 3%. Well, the 40,000 withdrawal from year 1 would now be 41,200. And I'm not trying to be super technical, and I'll post an infographic so people can see this. But inflation, let's just assume 3%. So year 2, that withdrawal instead of 40,000 becomes 41,200. Well, 41,200 out of that $1,036,800 portfolio after the market grew 8% is now $995,600. Then the portfolio would either grow or decline. And based off of the inflation adjusted withdrawal, in this case 41,200, then whatever inflation was in that following year, you would either you would adjust the withdrawal up or down for inflation. So that is the original 4% rule. But what this is kind of morphed into is taking a look at just taking out 4% annually. So in that case, let's say that you start with $1 million, the investor takes out, or the retiree takes out 40,000. So they have the same 960,000 that we had in the first example. Let's say the market grows at 8%, same balance, 1,036,800. But then in year two, instead of inflation adjusting the 40,000, they just take out 4% of that 1,036,800. In this case, they would take out 41,472. And then it would just keep repeating. Whatever the market does, you just take out 4%. However, in years like 2022, where the market has been down on the year and inflation is high, which we haven't seen in a long time, it can really destroy the portfolio's value, which we talked about in part one with sequence of return or orders of return risk. So thinking that through, what if the market had, what if you started with $1 million, you took out your 40,000, and then the market declined 15%? Well, now your balance is 816,000 as you enter year two of retirement. So now you have a decision to make, right? If inflation's 9%, are you going to give yourself a 9% cost of living increase knowing that your portfolio was down 15%? Or are you going to take just 4% of the smaller balance, the 816,000, but that's a huge pay cut versus what you had your first year in retirement? So these questions are really, really key when we're doing retirement planning to really define and identify the retirement style that an investor or retiree has, because really not everyone, in fact, only about a third, which you will listen to and hear in Wade Pfau's little clip that I have from his time on the Animal Spirits podcast, talking to Ben Carlson and Michael Batnick. As we basically build out retirement plans and spending strategies, again, I can't focus enough on finding the individual's style and staying strategy agnostic, because each investor is totally different. And if this total return approach is only really good for 1/3 of investors and retirees, then we have to figure out what would make sense for the other 2/3 of folks. So the 4% rule is definitely a decent benchmark to figure out how much a retiree might be able to live on in retirement, but it's not the be all end all. It really has to be personalized. And in future episodes, I'm going to get into different spending strategies specific to other types of retirement style investors and retirees. Let's go ahead and, another thing, I was going to play that clip and you'll hear about this too here in a second, but another thing with this 4% strategy is that the investor has to maintain no less than 50% in stocks, which might not feel great for a lot of investors. So here's a little excerpt from the white paper. Bengen says, quote, "It's appropriate to advise the client to accept a stock allocation as close to 75% as possible and in no cases less than 50%. End quote. And this is big because actually in May, Bengen came out and there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about how even his total return strategy that mathematically has worked, he's actually backed off of equities and had a smaller allocation to them because he does not like the volatility. Instead, he's realizing that the type of investor that he is, he doesn't have the risk capacity or the risk tolerance to tolerate the volatility that we've seen in 2022 in the market. Again, stressing this point again, we have to figure out what style you have as the retiree to then make the best selection to figure out what other methods are available that would be more comfortable for you for retirement withdrawals. Let's go ahead and play this clip from Wade Pfau on the Animal Spirits podcast, and then I'll discuss that after it's done.
So this sort of, the Bill Bengen, he's the heart and soul of what we call the total returns approach when we look at retirement styles. And it requires certain assumptions and preferences. In part, Bill Bengen had said retirees should be 75% stocks in retirement, and in no circumstance less than 50% stocks. And that's something you see when you do these kind of Monte Carlo simulations on investment strategies. The bond market is not going to get you a 4% rule, especially in today's interest rate environment. And even in the historical data, a bond portfolio had about a 2.4% safe withdrawal rate. So we have to consider, if someone wants to use that type of investment strategy for their retirement, do they have the kind of psychological preferences in mind that associate with that? And what was really revealing about that Wall Street Journal article was just this idea that Bill Bengen may not have been suited for the strategy that he's most known with. By going to 20% stocks, by being 70% cash, he's revealing that he's not comfortable relying on the stock market to fund his retirement. And there may be other strategies. Well, there are other strategies out there that he can consider. And that's where I think so much of this is missing the point. What you referred to, Ben, was it's the retirement consumption puzzle, that people are not spending their assets in retirement. And I'm concerned a lot of that is because so much of financial services is pushed towards this total returns retirement strategy. And in the research I've done with Alex Murguia, looking at a nationally representative sample of Americans, it looks like only about a third of people have the psychological makeup and to be able to be comfortable with that type of total return strategy to fund their retirement spending.
So there's a couple takeaways from that clip, and the most important ones are thinking about that retirement consumption puzzle. And not every retiree has the same solution to the puzzle. It's important to note that, like what Wade was saying, only 1/3 of the retirees that he has collected data from fit that total return, the 4% strategy, to a T. However, it doesn't make it a bad strategy. There's a lot of ways to make the 4% rule successful. You can add some differing rules, or some additional rules, I should say, to that 4% rule. Things like floors and ceilings, or guardrails, which I use a lot with clients that want to do a modified version of the 4% rule, but that maybe their success rate for doing what we'd call just the naked 4% rule isn't as high. However, since like 1926, the 4% rule has worked like 95% of the cases. If you add in the first 20 something years of the 1900s, it brings down the success rate to something like 70%. But that said, over the past roughly 100 years, it's worked 95% of the time. But, big but here and caveat is thinking about the different styles that investors and retirees have, because if a retiree, and even Bill Bengen, can't handle the volatility that the market has posed here in 2022 thus far, it may make sense to look at a different strategy, something using additional rules for the 4% rule, like I mentioned, something maybe like a bond ladder or annuities, or some sources of guaranteed income in addition to Social Securities and pensions and things to help that retiree sleep well at night. Now, one thing to say here is that it's super important to stay retirement strategy agnostic. You have to be able to identify the art and science when it comes to each individual client and how their specific retirement income strategy will play a role to solve that retirement consumption puzzle. It's important that you do that because there's so many advisors out there that they pinhole their clients into one specific strategy being the best strategy for all. And it's just not true. There are mathematically optimal strategies when it comes to planning your retirement and that income strategy that you take, but there's not necessarily one size fits all strategy for every single investor or retiree in the marketplace. That's why you have to have an advisor that stays strategy agnostic. I can't stress that enough. Now, wrapping this episode up, talking about the 4% rule. Things to keep in mind who the 4% rule might be good for. People that can trust the market, trust the math, and use the stock market as a way to fund their retirement through ups and downs, all volatility, all different times throughout a 30-year period. If you're unable to do that, you might have to modify your retirement distribution strategy, and that a naked 4% rule is not good for you. Who is it not good for? Somebody that wants to have some guarantees. So we called that a safety first approach. Someone that desires a safety first approach, which I'm going to talk about here in a future episode, would be not a great candidate for the 4% rule. So you have to find the balance on where you fit in when it comes to retirement withdrawals. And you do that by, I think one of my best tools so far is using Wade Pfau's retirement style approach and finding out where that investor is between safety first or probability based, aka 4% rule or total return approach, and then commitment versus optionality. Does the investor or retiree want to commit to a strategy over the long term, or would they like to have some level of optionality when it comes to their retirement distribution approach? There's many different ways to do it, and we have to make sure that we identify your style first. That said, the 4% rule can still be a great and viable approach if we do the correct rules and add some correct rules around it. Maybe not a rock solid recommendation here, but definitely one that I lean toward is having some additional rules on top of the 4% rule, which I'll discuss in the next part of this series. I hope this episode was helpful. I'm going to go ahead and stop it here. If you have any questions or anything, please let me know. As always, thanks for listening. If you found the information helpful, please leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast medium of choice.